All right, as we continue our post-Cold War from 1990 to the present, we're going to take a look at global security and then some of the major genocides that have occurred in the world since that time. Now, obviously, global security has become a really huge issue. With the fall of communism, George H.W. Bush stated that the U.S. Would need to make sure that it was secured for the New World Order. And essentially, the new threat was not any particular government, but it's now become terrorism. Terrorism has become a huge problem globally, and it's not just Islamic terrorists, just literally terrorism all over the place. We have the Oklahoma City bombing, which was actually caused by U.S. militants, and the leader of that movement was a white American by the name of Timothy McVeigh. Of course, you had Al Qaeda, which was led by Osama bin Laden, who's the one who orchestrated the September 11th attack. And these are just a few of the terrorist activities that have taken place involving the United States. But again, there's been global terrorism throughout the world, particularly the Irish Republican Army protesting again the British control of North Ireland. And just everywhere has been experiencing terrorist tactics and issues. Now, one of the big ones, of course, that a lot of you guys are familiar with is the right wing extremist group called the Taliban, which has actually gained control essentially of the country, even though they do represent a minority of the Islamic people in that actual country. They also refused to extradite bin Laden to the United States. Eventually, the U.S. Coalition invaded the country, and later it was discovered that bin Laden was hiding out in Pakistan and was actually killed in a raid. And these are pictures of the Taliban soldiers preparing for what was called the Spring Offensive. And again, the Taliban represents probably the most extreme conservative fundamentalist group of Muslims in the world today. Now, another one we had was with Iraq. Of course, we had President George W. Bush had intelligence allegedly that claimed that Saddam Hussein, pictured here on the right, who is the dictator of the country, was stockpiling weapons of mass destruction. He invaded the country in 2003, and it was largely criticized because there was no weapons actually found. However, in his defense, Bush was doing this on the guise, of course, like to prevent, say, an Adolf Hitler or a Benito Mussolini from rising to power. So I do believe his intentions were authentic. It was just simply the intelligence they had was incorrect. Now, later in the Second War, of course, Hussein was later captured, tried by an Iraqi tribunal, and was found guilty of crimes against humanity. And here's a picture from live TV that was broadcast in Iraq showing his execution. Now, one of the biggest areas that we have is genocide. Genocide has been taking place long before the Nazis and Adolf Hitler's Holocaust, but it has also, which is surprising to a lot of people, has been continued since World War II. One area, of course, is Bosnia, when Yugoslavia broke apart with its fall of communism and the death of its dictator, Josip Tito Broz. What happened was a number of ethnic countries ended up emerging from Yugoslavia. One, a Serbian nationalist by the name of Slobodan Milosevic, actually attacked Bosnia and Herzegovina and later Kosovo, creating a ethnic cleansing, trying to wipe out the Muslims in the region. And it's estimated that roughly 300,000 people were killed. But again, total numbers are still unclear. And this is a mass grave discovered in, I believe, Kosovo. Another one, which a lot of you guys that had me last year were familiar with, is Rwanda. Rwanda, after the death of their president, a Hutu, which is one of the tribal groups, the aircraft being allegedly shot down by rebel forces, we had fighting actually break out between two tribes. The Hutu, which was the majority, tried to cleanse it of the Tutsi minority and any of their sympathizers. This was a really brutal and bloody one, mainly because we're talking Rwanda is still a relatively primitive country. Most people were actually killed with machetes. It left a total of 800,000 dead in roughly a 9-month period, and mainly women and children were the focus of the attacks because the goal was to exterminate the next generation of the Tutsi. Now, another one which was a huge issue was in the Sudan. Sudan in the north is actually predominantly a Islamic Muslim state, while the southern area was actually occupied by black Africans who were either Coptic Christian or they also tended to be tribalistic, practicing animistic religions. Now, essentially, what happened was the Arab militants in control of the country, the what was called the Janjaweed, began to slaughter the non-Arab Muslims, particularly in the area of Darfur in 2003. It's a picture of skulls that were taken and kept. It's estimated that roughly 200,000 were killed. Now, this later launched into a civil war, and today Sudan has broken up into Sudan in the north and South Sudan, obviously, in the south, where the countries are now essentially divided by ethnic identity. It's estimated that roughly 1 million people were displaced, and this is a picture of some of the refugee camps in the surrounding African countries. And eventually, the Sudanese president, Omar al Bashir, was charged with war crimes.